All right, let's get started. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for inviting me.
So great to see you after all these years. We've had a couple of conversations. I mean, you reached out to me recently. We had a great reconnection, talked about our time at Intuit, and all the amazing things that have happened on our journey over the last few years. So it was very natural of me to think of you as one of the people to reach out to. I launched my website, The Accidental Ally, in just a few weeks ago on Mother's Day this year. And the goal is to really kind of get the conversation going on creating awareness and educating people on the importance of building inclusive experiences. And it stemmed from my own experience working on accessibility. And I wanted to talk about it. And really the goal was really to just tell stories. The goal was to connect people. The goal was to showcase the work that so many people are doing in that area. And of course, the natural extension of that work was to look at what does inclusion mean, right? And given what has been happening around us over the last few weeks, specifically with the Black Lives Matter movement, it has had a very significant impact on me as well as my family, my children, my husband. And there's been a lot of dialogue in our family about what that means. And we've reached out to our friends, specifically our Black friends and their families to say, tell us how you're doing. So I'd like to kick this off by asking you, how are you doing?
Well, thank you, for, first of all, thinking in this terms of trying to find a way to kind of continue the conversation or have these type of conversations, because this is probably what was lacking a little bit, in my opinion, in terms of how people engage in the discussion of talking about race in general, but thank you. But yeah, thanks for asking. So, I have my days, to be all true, to be all honest with you. Initially I was angry. Literally angry to where I cry because, my parents and my grandparents and my great-grandparents, they were sharecroppers, right? And they were, under Jim Crow and, all the stories that they've told me. I actually had my great-great-grandfather who was run off of his land because he had a wood cutting business. This is back in the 40s, down in South Carolina, and because he wanted to vote, and they told him he couldn't vote. And as you think about it, this was like 25 years before the Voting Rights Act passed. But he says, "Hey, I pay taxes. I'm a businessman," and they didn't like it, and so they came to him one night, and in the true fashion of the Klan, and telling me he had to get out of there, and he gave my great-grandmother a day to get their stuff and leave. So it really, when I see 60, 70 years later that, we're still dealing with the weak mindsets of some people, it just makes me angry. So, but I hope that, another Black man doesn't have to die for us to start to think about things differently in this country.
Yeah. What is the conversation in your household? I know you're raising children. What's happening in your home? How are you managing that? Because, I think I can relate to the feeling of that anxiety and, sometimes anger, sometimes frustration. How do you manage that when you're raising children, and what is the conversation in your home?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think being Black parents, and my kids are a little bit older now, but being Black parents, and I hate to say this to some degree, but these are conversations we have with them since they were old enough to start kind of hanging out by themselves, especially as they were teenagers, and understanding where they're hanging out, what they're doing, why you don't want to see somebody doing this, or if you're in a car with somebody, that you think is doing something right or wrong, not right, then, you need to get out of that situation. Call us, we'll come pick you up. Even if you got to stand aside the road, that's why we gave you a cell phone. So I think we've always had that conversation. So I think it's been more of an enlightening, and, as my kids have gotten older, I think they have started to rationalize things in a way, because one of the things that they've and I think my son said that, he said, well, I've always had to, kind of react to racism, even when I walk in a store, and people look at me or they ask me, hey, what can I help you with? It's like, oh, no, I'm just looking around the store. Why you ask me when you ask the other three people that are standing over there?
Right.
And so I think it's a matter of them trying to rationalize, like, at what point do they feel that, they have control of the situation, and what point they don't. So we've always talked about that. And so my thing has always been like with the police thing. My son, he's a Black young man, and he's a big guy, and so sometimes he got pulled over. And my concern is that he perceived a threat, and so I tell him, I don't care. That is not the time that you actually try to win your point of view,
Right.
because we prefer to have you alive. And it's sad that we have to have that discussion. So I think they are trying to rationalize it, but then they're also trying to. What I love about my kids is that they're saying, well, what can we do about it, right? So we know we're going to vote. I mean, they have, but they want to organize. They want to become part of the solution. And so that's the kind of conversation that my wife and I have tried to engage them in, and try to educate people.
Right. So, Mark, I was thinking about how we know each other, right? I mean, as I'm going through these conversations, I was thinking about the time we met, and how I viewed you, right? I think at this point we know each other for almost 10 years. We met Intuit. We worked together a little bit, but I remember most of our conversations being around, the employee resource groups, and the Intuit Black Association, the Intuit
African American Network.
African American Network, the Intuit Indian Association, and so and I was involved with the Intuit Women's Network. Oh, there it is! Yes.
I found this the other day. I was looking through some stuff.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing! I have to find I have a T-shirt and a jacket from the Intuit's Women's Network also.
Yeah. No, great times. It was good.
But I remember my memory of you was, first of all, it was really incredible to see. An African American person represented in the ranks, right? In senior leadership, showing up every day as a strong, educated leader, and leading the charge. Working for a Fortune 500 company, all of that, right? And you have since then have held many senior roles in, large companies, and advocated for African American inclusion and all of that. But when you see what's happening around us, what is going through your head, and how are you thinking about your approach, that you've applied so far in, whether it's building African American talent within the workforce, helping African Americans through the education system. I know that you've been involved in lots and lots of different initiatives. Has your approach changed, or will it change given the current environment? And what are you doing differently, I guess? I think that's the question.
Yeah. So, I think that I've always obviously been an advocate, and I've had the fortunate and blessed opportunity to be engaged and be thought of to lead some of these initiatives when I was at Intuit, or at some of my other companies where I was executive sponsor at GoDaddy. I was the executive sponsor of the Black in Technology group there. And so, I've always had that thing. So I think for me, mentorship has always been a very important part of that process. And what I think I was doing differently, because I've had a lot of people reach out to me, a lot of my white former colleagues, and saying, hey, want to see how you're doing. Let's talk about it. Tell me how I can help. They're asking me how I can help them. But I think for me, it's about, how can I help you?
Right.
Right. Because I think that's where it's always been like, hey, no, how can I help you? How can I help you deal with some of the things that you're challenged with, either in your own head, or within your team? Because I think that's ultimately where we have to start to display the real leadership around this. And I think we have to be able to understand that, racism, how we view other people, is a learned behavior. And we have to start breaking some of these paradigms. One of the things that I talked about at a previous company, when we were talking about microisms, right? And this is like those, tiny little things that, just come out. And one of the things that
microaggressions,
the aggressions. One of the things that is always something that's irritated me, and I see it all the time when we have an interview with a Black candidate, and that individual feedback I get was like, oh, that person's very articulate, and there's a checkbox. And I say, whoa, articulate. So as a Black individual, man or woman, they're not supposed to be able to speak the English language in a way that you believe is, what you thought was different than what you have. And it's like, no, we didn't mean anything by that. And so it's kind of this dynamic there that says, we have to start breaking these paradigms and having these discussions. So for me, to answer your question, what am I going to do differently? One, I want to, I always believe that, people change when they go through an experience.
Yeah.
Right. So you can talk about it in a book, you can read and write about it, but it's who you actually go through it.
Yeah.
That is the thing that engages you, because emotionally, physically, it does something to you when you go through an experience. So I am trying to see, I was talking to somebody else earlier, how do we actually take and engage more people in the Black experience? So it's a thought, not sure I'm going to do it yet, but it's one of the things I was talking to somebody earlier, and like, how do we do that? And how do we engage? So that's one of the things I want to do. Mentorship is important, not only for Black, leaders, but more so for white leaders. So I'm reaching out to my, junior white, leaders are out there.
Regardless of race, I think it's
Yeah,
important.
right, regardless of race, but just saying, hey, I'm here to help you.
Oh yeah.
Think through this, answer questions.
I've heard some of my, my Indian friends make some of the most racist comments. I mean, so I don't think racism is a white people problem or a Black people problem. I think racism is a humanitarian problem, right?
I would agree. There's racism across all spectrums of colors, because people have a perceived perception either through media, right, or through some other factors, like I said, that they actually are not always true. Because like you said, yeah, there's bad people across all spectrums,
right,
of colors.
Identity-based hatred, right? That something about that person you hate so much that you're willing to act on it. That I think is a humanitarian problem, right? And so it's great to hear you talk about educating your friends, regardless of race, having the conversation. And you said something about engaging. I mean, you said a lot of things about engaging. I think that COVID and the fact that we've been forced into isolation has forced us to almost engage at a whole nother level.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, the in-person contact has reduced, but I think that the world has opened up, right, with technology and people having conversations across borders and probably engaging more so than they were before and having meaningful conversations. I'm a strong believer that a lot of the root of bias, especially around racism, starts at home, in the conversations you have with your children. And even if it is something as a small remark you make about a specific race, your kids absorb it, right? And I think we've all been guilty of making comments, I mean, something as simple, I know that sometimes I make comments about, being fat or being overweight, but I have realized that it has an impact on your children because they absorb it differently. So how important is it, Mark, for us to do that at home, and how do we help people change the conversation right from their home environment? How do we do that?
Yeah, that's awesome points, and I definitely agree that. And I think it's just about just making that a conversation piece. So when you sit around the dinner table, in the evenings, ask people, just talk about like what are some of the perceptions you may have of things that are going on. How do you perceive friends? How do you perceive people? What bothers you? With a certain individual, or if you say something to the degree of, what don't you like about yourself?
Yeah.
Because I think that's where sometimes they start to your point. If somebody sees themselves differently, then they kind of convey that or display that on other people. They project it on other people, right? And so I think that's another part of having a conversation. And I think this is more of at a higher level, education level. These conversations need to happen at the lowest level in education. When they start out, like in kindergarten, first grade, and perceptions, because I had a good buddy of mine who said, because the question we asked is like, when's the first time you experienced, racism, right? And things of that nature. And it was like probably when they were in like second grade,
Mm-hmm.
right? When the person asked them, "Why are you chocolate?" And it's like, "Why am I chocolate? Because that's how I was born." But then he said, "Well, my parents said I couldn't play with people who were chocolate."
Right.
And so you go like, now, why would that even come up in a conversation?
Right.
And so I think it has to start there. And I think we have to educate. I think schools need to have programs around this, and we need to have parents, to your point, are having these conversations with their children,
Yeah.
and really having a dialogue with them. And then I think we just got to get people back to reading, and sharing other experiences. So look at great leaders who are in this space, who are doing things that are important. I know we always default to Martin Luther King, but there's a lot of other civil rights leaders, who Reverend Abernathy, who were part of that program, obviously Jesse and some of these other people who are still, able to convey kind of the message and the meaning for why we did what we did.
Right. I want to tell you a really short story and follow up on the question. Our closest friends, the Smiths, showed up at our door a few years ago, at our door at 2 a.m, and literally went, here's our 3-year-old kid, because his wife, our friend Liz was having a second one. So she labor. So like, here's Connor, can you please watch him? We don't have family coming in for a few more days. So we were like, great, we'll watch Connor. So we took Connor to the Golden Gate Bridge the next day, because we were like, let's take him to Chrissy Field. So Sanjay and I were, at that time, we didn't have kids. So we took this cute little kid, and he was like snuggling with us at night. It was so cute. It was nice to have this kid with us.
Yeah.
And I remember walking, and this was in San Francisco, right? This is like, he's 16 years old now. So this was 16 years ago. And I was walking him at the beach. And of course, here's this, white kid, freckles, red hair, and clearly he doesn't look like my child, right? And I could sense that the people around us were getting very uncomfortable, because they were not sure really what to make of that child being with me. And I sensed that discomfort around me, and quickly told my husband that I think we should leave, because I don't want, somebody calls the cops, and then it's an unnecessary distraction. I don't want to scare the kid. Let's just go. But it's such a simple thing. And we talked about it with our friends, Patrick and Liz, and we laughed it off as, oh, they thought, we had stolen your kid. Ha, ha, ha. We laughed it out and forgot about it. But and the reason I mentioned that incident is, Mark, that there are probably so many more stories that are worse that you can tell from your own experience. But we tend to laugh it off. And we tend to kind of let it roll off our backs. And the reason I asked that is, I asked this question in my previous interview of my friend Celeste, who I engaged in a conversation yesterday, is, why is it that we don't talk to our friends about race? And especially in this area, I'm talking about the Bay Area, where, nobody is from here. Everybody came here from somewhere.
From somewhere else, yeah, right, for the most part.
And we all look different. Some of us have mixed families, right? I mean, we have, just people from everywhere. But we rarely talk about race, because there's this kind of this understanding that, it doesn't matter. Race doesn't matter. We understand we're different. We'll accept our differences. We'll embrace our cultures. Somewhere along the lines, I think we need to have this conversation about race, because it is a consideration when you're living your life, and it shows up in different ways. And that's the reason why we are having the conversation now. So do you think that we need to have conversations with our friends about race and be more open about it?
Yeah, I think you do. You're right. I mean, because I think what race is, sort of this exterior thing, right? Because I see you, I see your color, I kind of guess what your ethnicity is. I kind of try to understand maybe what that means to you, but it really doesn't tell me about you, right? So what I've always tried to do was try to understand the person, because no matter what color, what background, where you're from, what I'm more concerned about is, potentially, what we connect on, what we have. So with friends, I think in order to be true friends, if they especially are from different backgrounds and from different cultures or race, I think it's a good point, because what you're doing, if you can talk about race, especially if you have younger kids, you are showing and displaying I guess, an example of what you want them to be able to do, right?
Mhm.
Because I think if you don't talk about it and you just assume it, or it's just around an inclusive part of your family, that we just talk about it with grandma and grandpa and they talk about all this and that, but that not share that with everyone else. Because that's the only way it's going to get there. That's the only way you're going to change people's perspectives on things.
And I think conversations about race have to be honest. It's not just about, you're black, I'm brown, therefore, we are different. I mean, I think it needs to be more than that. I think we need to be vulnerable and talk about the experiences we've had in our lives where we were scared,
Right.
where we felt shamed, where we felt like we didn't belong, where we were told to go back to our country. I mean, even though we've lived here 20 years and we're raising children here, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I
so
mean,
how,
I was George Floyd in his situation several times, not because of anything that I, think I've done wrong. It's just because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or I was driving the wrong vehicle, and and I got pulled over because they were like, "Well, what you doing here?" I said, "Well, I live down the street." What do you mean what I'm doing here?
right,
This is America the last time I checked. But you're right. I think you got to be honest. And I think you can't, and as people, we have to be vulnerable to recognize that we don't always have the right answers. We don't always know the right things to do. Will we make mistakes? Hell yeah, we'll make mistakes.
right,
But that's part of learning. And then as long as we're humble enough
right,
and willing enough to really change how, perception based on what we believe and what we know. Because again, I'm about relationships, and relationships is like one-on-one. It's about me and you. And you could have 20 other friends who look like me, be like me, but it's like, I want the relationship I have is with that individual or that group of individual
right,
friends. It's not
right,
like I kind of circle the whole group around it.
right, right. Speaking of honesty, Mark, what does it feel to be a black man in America today?
I think it's frustrating, right? Because I think we, have, as a black man, and again, I think we've learned or had to learn how to react to racism, and that's always been the case on everything we do. How people react, we're expected to take the higher road. We're expected to, as you say in corporate America, just don't have any data or document, but it's like, hey, you have to be doubly as better to get recognized or to get that opportunity or build that trust with your organization. And so it's frustrating, right? Because I think we have the same desires, we have the same dynamics as anyone else. But I
Right,
think access to information, access to schooling, I mean, just as a black man in America, just feels like it's just frustrating and sometimes exhausting.
right, right. How are you channeling your frustration? How are you contributing to make a difference?
Well, I don't have any
Because I
wine here.
know, I,
I don't have any wine here right now, but no.
I was just thinking the same thing. As soon as the call ends, I'm breaking the
I know we've had the wine discussion before, so we'll say that for the next engagement here.
Well, I think
No,
next time we'll meet a little later and start with a glass of wine and a toast to ending racism. Uh,
amen, amen. I love that. So what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to reach out to collective minds. I had a Zoom call with three of my buddies about a week ago who I've known for like 30 years, and we're just trying to continue to figure out like how can we make a difference, as black men in America to kind of drive stuff. So I think I'm channeling my little bit of frustration, a little bit of angst through talking to other people, getting common engagement, hearing and sharing other ideas. I'm praying more. I mean, I've prayed all my life, but I'm just trying to spend, more time praying
yeah.
because I'm a man of faith, and I want to make sure that no matter what's going on around me, it's easy to get sucked into,
Mhm.
life, having that grounding in faith and realize that, this is something that I need to have really, really be more spiritual around in some
Mhm.
cases besides reacting.
Mhm.
So those are a couple things, and then just trying to see how I can help people and educate more. So spending more time talking to people.
The next question is, what the next question is, which is, what can we as friends, colleagues, and allies do? What can you teach us, right? And
Mhm.
that's been the point of these conversations, is for me to reach out to my Black friends to say, I want to know how you're doing. I want to hear
Mhm.
what's going on in your mind. but at the same time, I want you to teach me how to be an ally. And to kind of reinforce really what feels natural to me, right? Which is to, take one step, one conversation, to basically start that process of engaging a little bit more actively as a society, right? I mean,
Yes.
just take the passive approach. I mean, I don't think it's enough to just, post a few times on Twitter and social media to say Black Lives Matter. I don't think that's enough. You need to keep the conversation going. You need to reach out to people who are in your network. So what are some things I can do? Tell me what I can do.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things you already talked about. But first of all, like I said, if you have, as an ally, what I would love is that if you have children, that you're having this conversation.
Yes.
Right. You're sitting down with them and say, hey, despite what your friends may say, we as a people, like I said, have to be able to respect everybody. Because, one of the things my mother taught me growing up is like, hey, there's two things that you always remember in life. We all come into this world the same, and we all leave this world. So that makes you no better or worse than anybody else. So, but what you want to make sure you do is treat everybody to respect everybody until you have a reason not to. So that's the first thing I say, have those conversations with your kids. And in some cases, I'm going to say, have those conversations with your parents if they're still alive.
Yes.
Because I think sometimes, and I'm saying like individuals, some of this was conveyed in how people think. It starts at the older generation too.
Yes.
So I say that, if you have parents, who may have a perception about certain people, have that discussion, right? And say, well, why do you think that way? What gave you that example? Start asking questions. So that's one of them.
Yeah.
Two, I will say, do the same with your friends, right? If you're in environments where you say people start to have that tone, I would love, as an ally, for you to jump in and say, wait a minute, why are you having a discussion? Where's the information? Why do you have that perception?
Right.
Have you ever experienced anybody? Have you ever had a Black person that have you ever invited a Black person over to have dinner with you? Have you ever had that? And it broke bread. I mean, so that's two things. And three, I just says that, obviously a lot of the things that we have here in business, and especially, within business, is have those conversations with your teams. Make it a part of a discussion around, we have Black Lives Matter, but the fact of how they're engaging and just respecting and honoring people. I played sports all my life, and I was fortunate enough to be able to do that, in college as well. And one of the things that breaks down everything is when you're on a team, right? And so, because what we didn't care if that person, or some people, you heard some of my friends who were in the military, the same thing. They're like, hey, we on a mission. We have the same thing. So we need to continue to perpetuate the mission of life, the mission of respect, the mission of, having the opportunity to learn and experience things, because it's just so much for us to experience if we just learn to listen to each other and spend more time with each other. Our lives will be more enriched.
Yeah. Mark, to wrap this up, I want to ask you, what's your wish for the future of inclusion in America? And it's not just limited to race, but it's also, all kinds of inclusion, right? People with disabilities, race, women.
Yeah, so there's a lot of inequity. So a lot of inequities across many different, races and genders. So, that's a big, awesome question, and a big one. But, I think it goes back to the golden principle for me. My hope is that through some of this, we just learn to treat people more like we want to be treated. And that solves a lot of stuff, because sometimes we're looking for sort of this major, we're a technology driven organization. We think there's some tech or some app that we can download. It's like, no, just do the right thing. That's all, do the right thing. Treat people like you want to. If you see somebody needs help, help them. Even though today we tend to not engage in community as much, we just got to build broader, better communities to include everybody, not just, single out people based on what they do, what our perceptions of their, what media sometimes perceives them to be.
Mark, I want to say I'm deeply appreciative of having known you all these years, and to call you my friend. and to stand by you, to do whatever we can in our power to address this very, very humanitarian issue. And I really hope that this evening, when you break open that glass of wine, a bottle of wine, and pour that glass, we can both toast to hopefully a more inclusive America in our lifetime, right?
Yes.
And not keep pushing this on to our future generations. So that is hope, but we're doing our part, and I appreciate you making the time for me for this conversation. I hope we can continue to engage, and you can keep sharing, all the great initiatives you're engaging your network with, and I will continue to do the same. So again, huge appreciation for this conversation. You've given us some really good insights to think about, and hopefully this will spring more action and dialogue, right? Hopefully this will continue, and it's not just one conversation.
No, thank you for taking the courage to put this out here, because this is all very kind of a sensitive topic, but I appreciate your allyship. I appreciate your leadership around this, which is, I think, what we need to see more of, leadership, in my opinion. But thank you. I consider you a great friend, and I appreciate the engagement and the relationship that we have. And yes, definitely, we'll have to start the next session off with some wine.
And wine, we have our common love for wine and birds, right? I mean, you and I have.
Oh, yeah, I showed you our birds that nest in our backyards. That and I showed you the picture of what happened to the eggs, so I couldn't find them. And then I see like 12 little
family of partridges.
Yeah, rolling around. So they're all good. They're all good here in the desert.
It gives you hope. On that note, thank you so much. Have a great.
Thank you, Gayatri. Thank you very much. Bless you, and have a good evening.
Thank you. You too. Bye.